Well, they
None?
couldn't find us anyway.
We're struggling to find ourselves.
Yeah.
You all had minutes, can I get approval on minutes, or is there corrections that need to be made?
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay.
Aye.
Thank you. So really a couple of things today. Last year we sat down and had a discussion about the process leading up to town meeting, the things we want to do next, not this year, but next year. So I'd like to do that again, and also going to talk about the schedule for Capcom, which Julia's got a draft of. I was not able to get the schedule for the special town meeting, but the special town meeting is the 10th of October. It's early. It means we're probably going to have to do something in August, which is kind of a pain, but. And we could also send a message that we're not interested in hearing things like zoning and stuff like that. Like otherwise not.
Since I guess I've been under a rock, what is the focus of the special town meeting?
It's the rezoning for the marijuana stuff. Remember, we took a moratorium, so we have to deal with that before the end of the year.
It was just from last night, right? Just a rock.
They
I don't think it was
officially,
that far under a rock. It was just last
It
night.
was only in the paper today.
they have been talking about it. The town clerk didn't want it to be late. So it's a Wednesday. It's
Yeah.
2 days after the holiday. So we can talk about that and adjourn ourselves. Anybody want to kick off what we liked about this year, what we didn't like about this year? I can give you a little bit of feedback that I've gotten from some of the select people about things that they wish we had done more of. Which we figure into how we want to attack this year.
Sure, that's a good place to start.
So, I haven't gotten a huge amount of feedback, but what I have gotten has generally been around the desire to see the finance committee look more closely at zoning articles and the financial implications of zoning articles. It's got a big smile on his face, no surprise there, because it's certainly a number of them just aren't getting, there's really nobody, we've had this discussion, nobody's really empowered to look at those impacts.
Yeah,
But
you
there
know,
can
what
be a
would be really
rapid-
helpful to us in doing that? A build-out analysis.
Yeah, right. No, I
Yeah.
think that's, it's not something to even laugh at. I mean,
Well,
we've
let's-
asked over a number of years for a build-out analysis and a population study, and we've gotten a little bit of lip service and no action from the planning department or the board of selectmen.
I think we're gonna get the population. Julia, you might have a little bit more recent information, but, Libby talked to me about whether the town should put some money in to get the population, which I recommend rather than asking for it for free.
Yeah, I'm sure most people around this table are subscribed to the newsletters that come from the Nantucket Data Platform, and they gave us the best approximation that I've seen of our population. That's at least the starting point, but we have no jumping off point for a build-out analysis. The last analysis that was done was when the town was considering adding secondary dwellings as an allowed use. That's the last time. And now we have tertiary dwellings in most zones. We have apartment buildings. We have 40-foot high buildings in commercial and island districts. We're so far from having even a rough approximation of how many dwelling units can be added by right that it's anybody's guess what can be built today.
So let me ask this, of you specifically, but anyway. So the planning board, as I understand it, is gonna undertake, or the Nantucket Planning and Economic PD, whatever the hell it is, you know what I'm talking about, is supposed to be undertaking an update on all of that. Is that, have I got that correct?
I don't attend their meetings. I speak with Nat on occasion. He hasn't mentioned it.
I think statutorily, they have to do it every 10 years.
Do what? No.
Do an update on their
master plan. Yeah, but I don't know that. I mean, certainly part of a master plan, a meaningful master plan, would include a build-out analysis. It's, my opinion. I don't think they're required to make it a part of the master plan. It wasn't part of the last master plan. They talked about increasing density here or there, or reducing it in certain areas, but there wasn't a count that we could, add and subtract from.
What I think I've learned anyway is we have a build-out analysis, and we've spent a lot of money to fulfill the capacity problem at the plant, but yet if you talk to David Gray and all the things that we've done lately, we can't get the sewer to the sewer plant, especially when we go, and give an example, if you look at Farm Road where one lot 10 years ago was one house, and now that same lot is 7 houses and 22 bathrooms, and there's still only a 6-inch line, and I mean, there's just a lot of infrastructure problems that I believe should go into these analyses as far as, someone wants another 40B, well, you could ask them, well, how's a 40B going to
Right.
get rid of all the sewer?
Yep. Okay.
Was there any more color on that request in terms of specific issues, or? It's
No,
pretty broad to say the financial implications of the zoning change. Were they getting at something specific, or? Was it-
Yeah, nobody's looking at it, and these particular members feel that every time we make a change, we, put a burden on our, our infrastructure, or certainly our financial underpinnings, and that nobody's looking at it, and that's not part of anybody's consideration. The challenge that I've always seen since my days here have been, we're not chartered with looking at zoning, and we stuck our nose in it in Richmond because it had, were you on the board? You were on the board.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. I guess I do mean to interrupt you, because we are chartered to look at zoning. I think that there's some custom that we don't, but we're
Okay.
allowed to, we're charged with looking at every article on town meeting warrant.
Correct, and
No,
we
no.
sort of had stayed away from it because it didn't have any financial implication.
Or maybe that's the reason, or maybe it was easier, and, previous versions, or
Yeah.
previous members of this committee didn't care to do it. But times have changed, we all see the significant cost that comes with growth, and we recognize, and Board of Selectmen members recognize, that there's analysis needed. So, it's not that we need new direction, or we need to be invited to weigh in on these things. We've always been allowed, we just stayed away for, I don't know what.
I have a question. I thought that the real estate committee was supposed to weigh in on these zoning pieces, and for the last couple of years, what's happened is by the time the real estate committee weighs in on them, we're so far gone with our process and voting that we never even get to discuss what the real estate committee's recommendations were, if in fact they ever looked at the zoning and got us any information.
Okay, so the real estate committee is not tasked with looking at zoning. They're tasked at looking at the town's sale of
The
property, or citizens asking for the town to sell the adjacent property.
So like that, what do they call it, the tag sale stuff?
Yeah,
Yard
Yard
sale.
this year, and so when
That's what I should tell.
feels like it, doesn't it? This year, so in the past, Rhoda Weinman has been the chair, and they have done that and made comments to us. Now, they stayed away from a couple of the more controversial ones, but generally they made comments. So John Brescher is the head of that group, and I reached out to him in the fall, and I said, here are the articles, are you going to, do you have a schedule to review them? And he said, it is not our charter to review these basically on policy basis. We only review to see that the price that's set is appropriate.
Only after
Only
the Board of
after,
Selectmen are
yeah.
authorized to,
Yeah. He said that's a town meeting activity, and I thought that was why we had this damn committee appointed. But
So if we were to participate or get more involved with the zoning articles, on some level it makes,
I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a meeting in here.
it would make sense that there would be somebody from Finance Committee sitting through all the zoning meetings, and even having a pro forma to say for every zoning change, we need to know these 5 pieces of financial data before it can be considered.
But I
Because otherwise-
don't think they care to give you that. They don't.
I know,
not
but
to,
I'm
not
just
to put words in
saying,
people's mouths, but I've asked them before, the saying, what's the implications to the sewer system? And they're like, We're not worried about it, it's not our
It's
job.
not our job. Right.
Well, at
Well,
the same time,
So
it doesn't have
even
to
if
be
we
their
had,
job. I
even if
mean,
we had
you
a,
can make it their job,
sort of
or
a build out or
Or
some sort of
Board of Selectmen.
global or macro capacity or whatever you're kind of limit sort of study. I'm not sure how the 9 or 10 of us, whatever we are, is going to look at a zoning change and make any kind of quantitative. I mean, isn't it all still going to be a subjective judgment? Oh, gee, they're building 4 homes. That seems like a lot of sewage.
In
We
the
don't
end,
like
it
it.
will be subjective, it'll be, you know, there will always be the counterpoint, which will be similar to what Richmond gave us, which was an analysis that said, sure, we're adding a lot of homes, but the only people who are gonna live in them are already here. You know, and it sounds ridiculous, I think it is, but, you know, we won't have any way to say, well, no, it isn't ridiculous, you know, because,
There's no doubt.
yeah, we can't look back and say, here's what happened when we went from 2 to 3 dwellings, or here's what, you know, we don't have any historical data, so.
I have no
What do they call it, the reflectivity, I think, of, I don't know if it's of people or of dwellings, it sounds like a funny term, but how many new people are you getting versus how many are you moving from one place to another? We'll never be able to answer that question.
After the last town meeting, I felt like some of those zoning articles and the debate that went around about them were misplaced at the town meeting. Right? It didn't make sense to me that we would be deciding whether some guy could subdivide his lot by vote of the population. That didn't make any sense to me.
That's not the law works.
I mean, but wouldn't there be, but that's affecting one individual person, right? And you know, my understanding of some of this is that is why there's a zoning committee to review all this stuff. And if there needs to be a change, then shouldn't somebody from the zoning committee get up and speak to that person's issue, not have that person represent themselves?
So there's no zoning committee, there's the real estate committee, which only decides if the price is fair after we decide if we want to sell something. There's the zoning board of appeals, which decides a whole different set of issues. And then there's the planning board, who I think a few years ago decided to wash their hands of citizen requests altogether because they didn't like being told by town meeting, you're giving us too much to consider.
So just in Lennox, there's a zoning board, right? And all of these issues go before the zoning board. And if you don't like the zoning board's decision, you can appeal it, and then it can go to town meeting for it to be voted on. But someone from the zoning board gets up and addresses it. So it's not this debate between 2 people in the audience about whether some guy gets to, you know, subdivide his lot, right? There's been a process, he's gone before a committee, there's been a decision, there's a paper trail, and if somebody wants to appeal it, then it could go to a vote.
Well, it does go to the planning board, right? I mean,
Yeah.
my perception is over the last 4 town meetings I've been part of, the planning board almost always seems to me lets the person, increase density. I can't think of a time where they got up and said, you know, this R40 or whatever, you know, we don't agree with the guy cutting it in half and getting 2 1-acre lots out of it.
Yeah. In the
It ends up-
abstract, they say, we won't do it for the next guy, you know, this won't continue to creep. But
But it
continues
does.
to creep. And it
Right,
sounds
because it's always like, well, the guy
specific.
next door got it, so why get it?
Right.
And then he was up fine with Wendy's, you know.
Well, and then it depends on which way the tide's running at town meeting. Sometimes they get them and sometimes they don't.
One of the things that I observed on the contract review committee this year is Dorothy had to do some really heroic work to get certain agencies to comply with basic data requests. And we spoke briefly about it at one of our meetings, and I've agreed with Dorothy and also with Rachel Day that in next year's applications, if they don't provide us with their fiscal year 20 budget, at least a draft of it, and a couple of other things, then their application is incomplete and they can go away. So no more flapping around and making Dorothy be a policeman on this, because it's basic. I mean, I'm not asking them to see, you know, cash flow and but I absolutely want to see that they've thought through what their expenses are going to be for what they're asking for money for.
Do you have any concern that the services will then go away and that there's services that are provided to the town?
No. I think the people who haven't complied are just not complying to, no, I don't worry about that. Because the agencies who comply are of the ones that potentially could be at risk, comply, and the one who doesn't is really, it's a you know, it feels like a shell game when you talk. You know, it's,
So
so,
then who is it?
Fairlands.
Right, and so 2 years ago, largely under the leadership
Yeah, I
of
was
our
gonna
own
say, I think
contract
Yeah,
review committee.
we did
we
say, hey,
recommended-
we're gonna, you know, basically sequester some funds that maybe you'll be able to get in the future when you comply with these basic set of requirements. And they said, we don't agree, so we're gonna go to town, well, first of all, they went to the Board of Selectmen, got some support from members of the Board of
Right.
Selectmen. Then they went to town meeting floor and said, hey, guys, it's unfair, they're holding back money from us. And the town meeting voters gave them more money. But if your point is about a different thing, about zoning and requiring
Well,
people
my
to
point
provide a
is,
certain
there should be a
amount of
minimum,
information.
right? We're not asking for crazy things, we're asking for just the minimum. So then that way we can sense check it, that we're not trying to do things in a fire drill. And the same thing with zoning, if zoning can add, we expect to add 3 sewer lines, and David Gray says, well, then it's gonna be this. And then there can be a number assigned to 5 key data indicators, then I think we can be involved. But if we're not even able to get that, you know from contract review committee, it's no fun trying to nail waves to the beach when people aren't willing to comply because they have their sense of, this is what I feel like doing,
Right.
and you break or get lost.
So-
So,
At the very least, what that would do, you know, setting out this set of requirements, even if, you know, it can't be, we don't have the statutory authority, I think, to say, if you don't do this, you don't get approved. But we can say, the applicant didn't provide this information, and that can color the discussion, it can be in our comment. In the same way that, you know, somebody who doesn't meet the sewer checklist, it's still possible that that person gets added to the sewer district, but they probably won't get it, you know, so.
And
we can set up
I have a
some-
sense that, you know, with the new members of the planning board, that there may be more receptivity to have this discussion. But the
Mhm.
other piece is just getting it earlier in the
right.
process. I mean, they, you know, the past 2 years, they've approved, you know, these things like the week before town meeting, which is, you know, give me a break.
Yeah. Well, that was this year too. There was a
No,
bunch of stuff that was wide open,
Yeah,
we couldn't even do that.
but to jump over to your contract review committee,
Mhm.
if that's, was that a concern this year?
Well, we could not get for love nor money so to speak, the budget, fiscal year 19 budget for Fairbanks. Could not get it, could not get it. Just, you know, oh yeah, maybe, oh well, we'll get back, bit.
So they invited me about a month ago to come visit with them. Not related to finance committee. So I met, they have a new board president, Chris Gay, Granier.
Okay, good.
Sharp guy, Philadelphia money manager guy. You know him?
No, of him.
Yeah. I was pretty impressed, and he stepped in pro bono to help straighten them out, and now he's gone on and is now chair of the board.
Okay,
If you think that that's an issue, let's have a conversation with Chris to say,
okay.
my sense is that he's gone a long way to straightening out.
We have a new
things.
treasurer. She works for Wells, forgotten her first name. She works for Teresa, I think. Works for Nantucket Bank. So she just started when we were going through this process. But they still don't have one full-time person doing financials, and they're $1 million organization. I mean, that alone makes the fur on the back of my neck stand up. You know, with the billings that they do or don't do, and you know, so our $50,000 or our $105,000 grant to them, I mean, it's 10% of their budget. They're not going to close if they didn't get it. And at the same
No,
time,
but what's gonna happen is what happened on town meeting for 2 years ago.
Yeah.
whatever it was.
yeah.
They'll
So
cut back services.
Well, they'll
Well,
say
this-
they'll cut
this-
back services,
this
they'll
year-
cut the money.
this year's, or they'll lose money like they, right? This year's grant was to expand services, so they're not coming back. They're trying to grow with it.
Yeah.
That was what the grant was for. So I'm not saying we should dissemble, or, you know, the organization is necessary. I just would like to see some more fiscal
It's interesting
control.
to see, we had a discussion about the fact that the community foundation's grant-making capability through Healthy Nantucket,
Mhm.
through the hospital or partners or whoever sponsors that, gave them very little money, which kind of surprised me. I mean,
Well, because you have
it-
Gosnell now, and there is duplication of services.
And it was erroneously said at meeting that Gosnell was not a not-for-profit.
I don't know that. I don't
In
remember
our,
that.
in our meeting, I recused, but there was a question why Gosnell didn't get money. There was discussion of them not being a not-for-profit, which struck me as weird at the time. I went back and took a look, and they are a not-for-profit.
Yeah, I just know that they're actually, Fairwinds, when they were presenting it to us, said, oh, we're not the same as Gosnell, we're completely separate.
Oh, yeah, no,
In terms of, no, but in terms of
definitely.
we provide different services than Gosnell. And 80% of that true, but what they wanted money for this year was the walking clinic, which is exactly what Gosnell is also set up. So, yeah,
Which they both.
so, anyway, I just.
So, let's go back to zoning. How do we, how do we want to attack this problem? I think we know what the symptoms are.
Wouldn't
We don't know what medicine we need to give it.
Wouldn't the town, when the zoning changes, the town incurs costs, correct? Theoretically,
Well,
right? Or
there
could incur costs.
Or there may be savings to be had. I mean, they're, at least theoretically, possible.
There's revenue to be had.
Yes, I was just gonna say, there's money to be made.
So I don't think, reflectivity is something that we're never going to be able to assess, I don't think, not meaningfully. So the best we can do is say, we're adding this number of dwellings, this number of people, this number of cars can be expected to be added to this lot. We can't say it's necessarily going to be added to the aggregate total. We don't know if somebody's going to move from one part of the island to the other, but we know that this area, which previously was going to have 20 dwellings, can now have 60. That's something that we can say. We can say, there are so many people in the public school system per dwelling. We can say things like that, and then maybe leave it to the voters to make their own conclusions.
So you're saying develop like a set of metrics that gets applied to each zoning article that nets those results?
I think that the planning board took a positive step, the planning department took a positive step this year. And they did say this zoning change will result in the potential for this number of lots to be created or this number of dwellings. We can take it a step further and say that, per capita, per dwelling, there are this number of students. There's a requirement for this number of police officers, that kind of thing. So maybe that's helpful.
Maybe, if perhaps as a solution, what if we were to, so we're gonna have to get together in August anyway to do some of these citizen stuff in the warrant. What if we included it in that and asked the planning, see if we could do a joint meeting with the planning board? See if they would do it, so that we could have a conversation about what it is that we're trying to get at.
Should we instead do it with the MP and EDC? And I think the only difference there is we've got a member of the Board of Selectmen and there's maybe an at-large member or two. There may be some different perspectives, and they have, they're charged.
I'm fine, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think that's actually a better suggestion, because I think that's where fundamentally the power derives. It's not really planning.
I think we're, miles away from it, but eventually I'd like, after we know how many people are here, and, we could maybe one day have a conversation about, what the economic future of the island looks like. It can't continue to be mostly building. We're just running out of new dirt to do that. What does it look like in the future? How do we want to be connected to the rest of America? What kind of jobs do we want to create here? We're far away from that, but to lay the groundwork to have that conversation in the future would be good.
It does strike me we could come up with some sort of a checklist that sort of makes at this stage, I think, a pretty gross estimate of, incremental tax revenue, sort of fiscal, expenses that may affect the town, and it could be sewer, power,
That's what I was
roads,
trying to
road
get to.
maintenance,
Yeah.
school, but I guess I'm reluctant, you could turn this into a PhD thesis project if you want to get into modeling all this stuff at a really tiny level, so.
I think you could keep it, I mean,
Well,
it's
I'm
10
thinking
lines
like,
or less.
yeah, I mean,
Here's
yeah,
potential
but,
costs,
and
and
then
here's
you
potential savings.
end up scoring it
Yeah.
like this is a +3 or this is a -6, I don't know.
And as the person that was on the vitriolic end of the Richmond group for trying to do this, the challenge, and I'm not telling the story to discourage, but the challenge is there are so many interpretations of what the impacts are fiscally
Well,
that it is, we could come up with something and they will find they being whatever the person doesn't like.
Other experts don't agree with
Who say that's totally wrong, and you've got the wrong methodology, and that's, that was kind of the whipsaw that I found myself in.
So
With
so
Richmond
that's
Group.
what we can, we can steer clear of that by saying this will result in more dwellings. Currently, there are this number of students per dwelling year-round, this number of teachers, and leave it to voters to make up their mind. I think that's the best we can do. If we do attempt to reach a conclusion, somebody, whoever's the,
Sure.
moneyed interest, or maybe not money, but whoever's the beneficiary of the zoning change will tell you that you're wrong. And we'll maybe.
well, but again, you have to start somewhere. So if you keep it relatively simple, don't ask for too much, and just have a couple of key indicators. Number of buildings equals this many sewer, access to the road. I mean, it's, keep it as simple as possible, tag it to something concrete, a building,
Right.
and whether it's a home or a business is probably the difference between the two. And
Sure, and it will affect, every dwelling that you add to sewer eats up a certain percentage of the available capacity. That's something we can certainly measure. We can't say, and I want to, steer clear of saying things like, we'll get 2.4 students out of this. But we can say, dwellings average 0.2 students currently, and we're adding 20 of them.
Let me tell you how that's the tyranny of average. So if you look at permanent homes on Nantucket year-round, and you look at the percent of the population that's over 60 that occupies a home, subtract that from being a household forming entity, and you look at the number of students per household, that number goes way.
sure.
And it's real easy to make a 0.2 or whatever the number is. I mean, therein goes the challenge. It's real easy to make that argument off of averages.
Sure.
It's the average
Well,
temperature in the
I
hospital
don't-
doesn't really tell you anything.
I think we're gonna just need to have to try a few.
Yeah.
I don't think we're really gonna know if
Right.
we're getting to something meaningful.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing here, I'm kinda like, I don't know if that's doing anyone any good. I mean, so I think
Gotta start
we gotta
somewhere.
run some test cases and say,
Yeah, because
it looks like we had some value here for at the
Because
end of the
my
day.
guess is, taking a 2-acre zoning down to 1-acre zoning and going from whatever that allows, 2 dwellings to 4 dwellings, you're gonna say, oh, tax revenues are going to go up $10,000 and a couple of building permit fee, you can say, oh, there's some revenue here, that's good. There's already sewer, they don't have to,
Yeah.
I think incrementals, like, why not?
0.001%.
The marginal- yeah, the marginal
The
cost of
marginals,
that
they're like,
ain't-
it looks like it's a net plus to the town.
Yeah.
Steve, you to push around numbers. Do you have any
This
comments
is
you
a
want to make?
great conversation. Stephen Welch, Capital Program Committee Chair, if you don't know who I am. Can I comment on a couple of things?
That's why
Do you mind if
I'm asking you.
I think, Stephen, I support your concept. I think it's one that I'm working on in different areas, capital and HDC even. And I would give you a little pushback on that. I would suggest that as opposed to having it be an eventual goal, your point about, who are we going to be? What are we going to look like? What are we going to do? How are we going to support ourselves? In a way, I've been using the term Nantucket 2050 and beyond.
I own that domain.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
We should
So
talk.
stop using it.
Well, no,
We're-
just pay them $1 every time.
We're talking about it at HDC with, I'm heading up the organizational focus committee to revamp the Building with Nantucket in Mind guidelines. And part of that procedure has to do with some of the things you're talking about. And more, this is more like Eketric, so it's not just the architecture, it's not just the number of homes and zoning, it's not just the cost, it's the sociological aspect of the demographic and what the effect is on the community as a whole, and we're a pretty isolated community, so it's pretty important. But anyways, the point I was just gonna make about your point was, I believe it should be a goal, and then everything should flow forward from that.
Right.
Because if we wait, I understand your point, and I understand, myself, someone, I think you may have said it's like nailing waves to the beach. But if you have it as a goal and you can get everybody to support it, and then it happens to coincide with the master plan, which is imminent, and some of the HDC things, which, as we know, I think many people have forgotten, the HDC is actually, its act is not just to preserve the historical fabric and character of Nantucket, but it's also because it's an economic engine for the island.
Yeah, in fact, the first thing follows the second.
Without question. So the thing I hear when I'm at these meetings, because I happen to be an associate and alternate on a couple of different things, is we're so compartmentalized. It's bothersome, and in many ways, not least of which is, I don't think we need necessarily central planning, but where a lot of things are falling through the cracks, in my opinion. Anyway, so the numbers, and the only thing I would suggest is with your metrics on the planning side of things, I don't see an issue with trying to get down to dollars and numbers and cents and trying to understand cents with an S. Is where is the give and the take in the past zoning changes in the master plan? Because I think, and then the master plan and zoning changes to come forward. So for instance, I believe there are statistics, based on real data of what's been taken out of potential buildability and the density that's related to that, whether it's single family, it's large enough to have a second dwelling, or now large enough to have a tertiary. And then what is coming back into housing stock. And I don't know that you can easily capture that in a plus minus, but it is a metric that I think may have some validity in the longer term planning. I'm not sure how you would encapsulate that to create a dialogue around a particular article that comes in front of town meeting about a particular lot or a particular 3 or 4 lots. It's more of a bigger picture macro look, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The other part that I think along those lines where you're having a trade-off that I think is valuable to the town is with infill housing, and you're utilizing existing sewer, utilities in place, existing road work. You're doing that in areas that are close to the school, so then we're looking at, we don't have more costs incurred for busing, for maintaining busing, or having to pay for contracts for maintaining the busing. I mean, there's just there's just so many little details that you can get into. So those are just a couple of thoughts on those topics, and I wish you the best of luck with pursuing this.
Well, I think it goes back to what you said. Might as well just try it and see whether there's some way we
Yeah.
can put a judgment on a zoning article and.
What about David's idea of reviewing the zoning changes in a joint group with your committee and the other committee that you suggested?
Well, I think that maybe having a discussion with the NPDEC ahead of, and to take some, the opportunity and, I don't know who is now the head of NPDEC.
I think Nat was the chair, and I don't think they've changed that. So,
But my sense is there's probably some receptivity. Is Kelly or Rita?
who's the representative for us?
Yeah.
I thought it was Jason.
I think it's Matt Fee.
Okay, we got one left.
It might be Dawn.
It's Matt.
Is it Matt? All right, then we'll be able to have that discussion.
Yeah.
So
That'd be
let's-
great.
let's
I
have
think
that
that's the
discussion
appropriate
with
audience
them.
by name, and
Yeah.
knowing that Matt's there, I think he'd be interested in,
Yeah.
Okay.
in that discussion.
And if I may, just with that committee or commission, you actually have potentially resources
Right.
to be developing, staff resources, not directly by who's named on the webpage, but underneath them, where the planning
Yeah.
board,
And,
don't.
and state funding, I mean, that's the whole
Yeah.
reason we
Yeah.
have them.
And this is really not the-
Conduit for state funding.
This is really not a planning board.
Yep.
Given their
Right, well, that's,
statutory charge.
that's what we hear from
economic
all the
development.
time, is they
Yeah.
can't say no to a lot of things because they get beat in court, so, okay, so we'll talk to you, but in a different venue.
Okay? I assume that I would not
Oh, the
capital,
contract
but a
review.
contract review.
Yes.
Maybe somebody else would like to do that, but.
Somebody else wants to volunteer, I'll step aside, but my understanding from Rachel and Dorothy is that I'm in for the duration.
Okay.
So, and I'm fine with that.
So, it seems to me that a reach out ahead of time to a smaller group of people to make sure they're on the right track, so you don't,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big believer in pre-wiring.
Oh,
a
yeah,
bunch of this
absolutely.
stuff.
And we've said that during the discussions we had with all of them this time, so the only one we have to remind of that is Fairways. Everybody else was fine.
And I've gotta believe that that's the track that they're on.
Good, good. Yeah.
And I think they've got some,
I mean, they're
Good
doing good
management.
work and their intentions are good. It's just, it
Yeah.
always makes me nervous when you start talking about numbers and people start to waffle. It just
Yeah.
makes me nervous.
okay. What else did we,
Did you have any other feedback from the board of selectmen besides the zoning?
well, so zoning, this whole issue of these little purchases of land, you know, we've got a conundrum, because they expect us to vet all of those. At least with the zoning, you can put it to somebody else, I mean, it's the planning board's responsibility, but, you know, these little,
Yard sale.
Is
Well, the
it not
yard sale?
appropriate to ask the real estate committee to do their value assessment before we authorize the board of selectmen to purchase or convey land?
One would
Good
think.
thing.
I have talked to our town manager about this because I was really irritated. Because it really, particularly somebody looking at the stuff up at, up on the cliff, Lincoln
Lincoln
Circle.
Circle, all those chunks of
Right.
yard.
Yeah.
Who suggested that be parking?
Yeah. There
I thought that was a great idea.
There was a guy who stood up and said, why don't we just turn that into parking so people can get easily to Step
Yeah.
Beach and
Right.
do no
The fact
parking.
that it's a Nobel laureate economist's house right in front should be of no,
Good spot for a 40B.
I think the problem was just that they had paid taxes on the property for so long that
Yeah, they haven't
it
made
would have
that.
wasted a lot of time.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't think adverse possession claims hold any water with towns and federal government land, so I think we would have been able to win that. You might have had to return the tax land, but you would have gotten it back when you sold them the land back.
So I guess the question, I mean, to me, the problem is the way their charter has been set up, not,
The real
they're not
estate
doing,
committee.
yeah, not that they're not doing their job. Because-
Yeah.
Right, I just
Pardon
think
me?
that
It's too narrow.
something was lost in
narrow.
translation when we set it up. I remember that the real estate committee was established after a few instances of selling land to people that made the lot that the small piece was attached to subdividable.
Right.
And it was, well, we created $500,000 in equity for this person, and they each paid $4,000. And I think one example was the old water tower in Sconset. That lot was subdividable, and we sold it like it wasn't. So it does make sense that when we authorize the board of selectmen to do something, we know what we're doing ahead of time, rather than.
And this is not, I'm confused now. I thought the real estate committee's charter was to be able to, you know, in effect, appraise.
It is,
A-
but
a
they
slice of
only
land.
do it after the board of selectmen is authorized to obtain or convey the property.
That doesn't
Then
make
they
sense.
tell the board of selectmen, here's how much we think it's worth. But the town meeting voters have no idea the potential value of the land that we're authorizing the board of selectmen to do what they will with.
And this all came about, Stephen's absolutely right, there was a deal in Wisconsin that nobody knew that by making this purchase and then conveyance, that we were creating a very valuable lot for somebody. And I probably conveyed for $4,000 or something.
Well, I mean, it was the whole, land where the tower was, so it was substantially more than that.
Yeah, that was a
But-
different, that was
That
different.
sold for a lot of money.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
about selling a buildable lot, that wasn't about appending a small piece of property.
Right, so they were
There's a lot of
separate,
two
but that
different-
lot was also subdivided, so it's a similar issue, and we could have gotten more as the point.
But without the recommendation from the real estate committee, it's very hard for the finance committee to make a vote on whether or not we should support these yard sale projects.
Other than
you
you,
wanna go-
who's gonna know that, you know,
Right.
you're turning a, 0.8 acre lot into an acre and
Right.
this applies and all of a sudden it's worth lots of money.
And right now, we're the, I mean, if their charter is the way they're interpreting it, then we're the only ones. that-
I
When we
mean-
put a recommendation, we in theory have looked at it.
I suppose that we can do that. I think last year we thought that that wasn't our charge, but if it is, then we can do that.
And most of those yard sales, really, I think are just like cleanup items in Surfside where there was this
Yeah.
huge gridding and there's,
Yeah, we may have
20
closed the barn
feet.
door too late, you're saying? I mean, it could be.
well, it wasn't necessarily made where it made things so much valuable, but just get rid of the land and let someone else pay taxes on it unless somebody have the liability of the land.
Yeah.
But talk about a secondary, we turned it down, but talk about a secondary or tertiary impact was the stuff that bottom line. It came in, through an attorney.
Yes, where the people wanted to take over the driveway, and the gentleman who painfully sat through 2 hours of finance committee to get to his, because he was
Yeah.
number 82. And he said, oh, I'm here to say no, because otherwise my driveway's gone, I can't get to my house.
That wasn't a question of value, really, that was just a question of.
Well, that was a question of appropriateness, and I guess the value falls under that.
So,
And I think that,
Not dollars and cents value.
No, I understand, yeah, but there's an example of,
drive to his house.
if you just, okay, they're fine, come, presumably.
But that's why we have a town meeting, because that person also got up, or the wife got up at town meeting and said, this is how we get to our house, please vote no, and everyone voted no. I mean, that is the process working.
Right, and we also said no, but if we had said yes.
but, I mean, just think about chronologically the way these things are considered at town meeting. They're way at the end.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get out in one night, and there's, 5 left from Steve Cohen and Arthur Reed, and they're way out in Matacasham, and we don't know how big or small they are, and we're not even sure we have the right map up on the screen, and, we take a vote. I don't know if it's okay to just leave it to town meeting floor to assess those things.
Okay. So we've got to do a little more homework then on these sorts of articles to make sure that we're not just.
That's
You
fine.
know, it's an old paper road at first.
In my tenure here, in the two years, I haven't seen one where I felt as a voter uncomfortable with the information presented that I was concerned. I know some people get more concerned than others about that somebody might be getting something for nothing. But I just don't know. I haven't seen one come before us where I didn't feel like,
Okay, well, I mean, that's a good perspective.
yeah.
I mean, this year, we had one that didn't have the words portion of in it, and we
Right.
almost conveyed like 1.5 acres of land near the beach. I think it was in Cisco.
I remember that.
Oops.
But I really like
A
that.
drafting
It's like-
error.
Yeah, I mean, I caught it, but it's not me. It's not, I shouldn't be the guy to catch that. We have, I mean, a real
Lots of other
estate
people
committee
have seen
should
it
do that.
before.
Well,
Or planning department should do that.
I guess, I'm not sure. I mean, I think
I
at
don't-
that level of diligence we are capable of, and we do that.
We're capable of it, and certainly we'll do it and read all the words, but, one person shouldn't catch that. And I think that's why we have, I mean, that to me is why we set up the committee, even if that's not what the, text of their charter says. I think that's why we set up the real estate review committee.
Well, let's have I'm happy to take a conversation back to the town manager and say, can we make sure the charter reflects that we would like them to look at this ahead of time.
Yeah, I don't think it's inappropriate to ask to know what the value of these properties are and to have somebody else have vetted them before we have to vote on whether or not we support it. I don't think that's inappropriate.
But maybe in terms of schedule, what this is, you might want to, as we come up with our calendar for town meeting 19, we're probably going to have to, these things tend to be complicated and take a little more careful reading than maybe some others. So we probably have to put a meeting earlier in the calendar that says, let's sit down and walk through these, whether it's zoning or real estate articles, and try to identify whether they're simple, medium, or really
And
complicated.
the good news is that a lot of these, at least lately, have been coming through citizens.
So we see them.
Petitions
Okay.
earlier.
Okay. And those were the two major points of feedback that I got from select people. Were there other things that
Yeah, I had a
we
couple.
liked about?
I had a couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
This goes into the don't like category, maybe more than like. I mean, I get a feeling. I've been through a couple of sites, and I've expressed this frustration before. That there are areas where I feel like we're late to the game, and things are presented to us as sort of an all or nothing proposition, and it's not practical to go nothing, and so we don't end up adding a lot of value. I think it's less the case, or it feels like less the case where we have representation. So whether it's contract review or capital, I feel like we're kind of more in the loop early in the process.
You have any?
I have two examples that probably won't surprise anyone that they're not examples. One is certainly the CPC. And, you know, I still feel, having had to go back and forth with some negotiation with the selectmen on the Affordable Housing Trust this year, that the CPC could be run, there's an opportunity for the CPC to be much more in alignment with the priorities of the town, rather than run as a separate thing that just does diligence, and if you meet the criteria, you get your portion piece of the pie.
We just changed.
Yeah. You know, and again, I'll go back to, you know, the fact that we're funding Affordable Housing Trust out of the town budget,
Yeah.
when statutorily 80% of the money in the CPC could be going to affordable housing, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I get how it happens, the way the flow is now. I just wish that the selectmen would get together with the CPC and the Affordable Housing Trust and address that issue. So I don't know how, but that is, and I may just be one person in this, but if the committee felt that way, how does the committee influence some of these things to make them happen earlier in the process of the next cycle, so that we don't keep missing an opportunity? And maybe the committee doesn't, but that's an example, sort of a process issue.
So,
And can I just use my second example?
okay.
My second example is the school. And, you know, we talked about it a lot this year. And I think I wish Peter was here, because I thought Peter did an excellent job of actually using data, right? The premium per student that Nantucket invests in students is shrinking. That's indisputable. And then the sense of many people is that that premium is shrinking below what businesses on Nantucket tend to have their costs be relative to off-island students, right? So that's data. And then if you use just the sort of sense that we've talked about in the past of the committee feeling that town meeting would be interested in hearing what its return on investment might be of spending more money in the schools. But every year the school committee, or rather the school administration comes in, they do their thing, we all go, oh, thanks for that, boy, we wish you'd ask us for more money, see you next year. And there's no feedback mechanism to make anything happen. So there are analogous situations from our perspective.
So, any comments on these things? I have a few comments.
Other than the CPC's, I mean, I always start from the mission, so is the, I don't know, off the top of my head, CPC's mission, is it supposed to be in line with the town or not? Are they supposed to be totally independent and off on their own, or?
Well, all I know, I don't know exactly. What I know, what I think I know, because what I thought I know in the past has turned out to not be true, based on things that I've read from.
Do that a lot.
Often
No,
wrong.
I do that a lot.
Okay.
Often wrong, never in doubt.
Always based on what I've read, by the people who prepared. You know, you're allowed, you have to apportion it at least 10% to each of the three
Yep.
areas. We could be 80% housing. This is coming from the same document that's misinformed me in the past, so with that caveat, according to our housing production plan, there are several communities who have made the Affordable Housing Trust just the block recipient of a large portion of their CPC funds, and sort of where the Affordable Housing Trust sort of sits within the CPC and has that stream of revenue to do its mission. Now, that's what our housing production plan says. I'm not saying we have to go all the way to that model, but it does seem that there is flexibility. And, you know, I look at it and as, you know, relative to other communities in the Commonwealth, I'm guessing we're pretty far ahead on historic preservation. We're pretty good on open space, but we seem to have this huge priority around affordable housing. But yet, nothing, but instead we get pickleball courts. Like,
Right.
And
so.
the windows. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
so
my
pickle
favorite thing.
or pickle? You want pickle? Just before, let me ask Brian or Julia, so does the town intersect at all with the CPC folks in their deliberations and input?
I think there's a couple, I think one of the selectmen is on the CPC committee.
Yeah, but there's,
And aren't some of them appointed by, I mean, some of them are
Yes.
elected and some of them are appointed by the
No,
select.
I don't know, there's none elected. I think they're all appointed. by the
but
selectmen.
you don't get
No, I don't-
asked,
There's none elected.
It's
What
supposed to
is-
be one from certain.
Right, but
Yeah.
you're not asked, you know, to provide sort of,
No, but I mean, the intersection, I guess, would take place in the fact that, I mean, the town obviously has applied for grants from CPC for various things, so that's probably where the intersection is, and obviously, the Affordable Housing Trust has gone before them and made the case. I suspect that the school may go before them next year for part of Bacchus Lane, because I think there was some miscommunication or misunderstanding amongst everybody, and, you know, the playground at Bacchus Lane may actually be eligible under open space for CPC funding, so, I don't know how it'll all come down to pass, but we have not generally sat down, because they're, in theory, I think, supposed to be independent, because they get the 3%, and they have a committee and a process to go through to manage and how they dole out that money.
So why are they on the town meeting warrant at all?
Could I interject?
Go ahead.
David, Mr. Chairman? I have a little experience with this. I was actually on the Nantucket Housing Needs Partnership after we got the covenant together, and we morphed into setting up the Community Preservation Act being accepted at town meeting, and I was involved in drafting the CPC language. So it is what you think, as you mentioned. They have a mission statement, and if it meets the mandate, they prioritize. At least currently, that's how it's set up, and that followed the state model. There was no, I'm not aware of any guidance or requirement at the time or after that be the only way to approach it, but it was some of the minimum requirements were in there.
I mean, I think that.
They're on town meeting floor because it's a raise and appropriated tax dollars.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a legitimate
But
discussion point, which is an alignment. This alignment question, I think, is important.
the raise and appropriate is the 3%?
Yes.
Even though that,
Comes
We
out
just
of-
don't own
So then
many
the
of these
statutory authority still lies with the town meeting voters, even though we have this committee who recommends how the money's spent.
but doesn't the
Yes.
3%
So
go to the
making-
state, and then the state divvies it up and apportions it back to
No, the
CPC?
state, no, we collect the money on the tax bills for the 3%. We report to the state, and then it's what they allocate is based on the collections to give back. We collect the money on the tax bill.
No, okay,
So-
but I don't understand,
Yeah.
when
So-
Ken Bogrand sits there and says, well, our
There is
pot is
state-
shrinking because other towns have
Well, right,
CPCs,
so,
and they.
yes, so
Because
the
it's a matching.
there's a
Right.
matching, it's
It's a
matching.
matching.
And
It's
at
a
first,
sa-
nobody was in a seat.
Right.
No one had one.
So basically, it's down to about 17%, roughly thereabouts, because and the city of Boston just approved it, so the match is actually probably going to shrink based on that fact that they're involved now.
Yeah,
They need the money.
there's a misnomer that this is like tax money from heaven, so it's not real money, we can spend it, because it comes floating down from the state. I'm not saying you're making that point, but, and that's less and less, I would argue, it's never the case. It's certainly less and less the case, it's some local tax.
The majority of the money that the CPC funding is the 3% that's added on the tax bill, so that's why it ends up on town meeting floor, because it theoretically is raised and appropriated.
Well, this is probably a good time to have this discussion, because, you know, with the court case about giving to religious institutions, which, you know, CPC could continue to do that, maybe some risk, but maybe this is the time to have a discussion with
Right.
the committee and program. But
Do they have a written statement of what their priorities are, or is it sort of an ad hoc, whoever's on the committee
want
from
to go
year to
down that
year?
rabbit hole, Steve?
I mean, I think affordable housing is their largest single.
Well,
recipient.
they give to Habitat, right? You get money.
And they give to Housing Nantucket, and I think it's 40+%, I think, of their
But there was-
distributions.
There was plenty of headroom there to cover the 300 that came out of the budget that could have been spent on gifted and talent program in the schools.
So,
That's my opinion.
yeah, so I took it upon myself, actually, last week, to have a conversation with a former school board member, figuring that was the easiest path about this issue. And what that person told me is that Cozart's very conservative. He doesn't, and particularly when they were trying to get money for the new building, he didn't want to come in with a big ask for curriculum expansion and teacher expansion. But that he is very conservative. which
Even though we
is
told them
spent.
to ask for more money more than one time, more than one budget cycle.
Yeah, but I don't think he feels any answers to us, so.
Well, he doesn't.
Right, which so when you were saying about the school committee, like, I really agree with that, and I'll just give the other example from Lennox. In Lennox, the school committee presents the budget at the town meeting. And so I made a similar assumption like you in the CPC thing, and thought, oh, well, Nantucket does this differently because they don't want citizens to get up on the town meeting floor and challenge the budget that the school committee has approved. So we don't do it like that here in Nantucket. But in other towns, that's how it's done. The school committee presents the budget at the town meeting floor, and citizens get up and challenge pieces of it, and they go back and forth on it. And the reason why this was an issue in Lennox is that they have school choice, and school choice makes up a large percentage of their budget, and there's a percentage of the population there that doesn't want school choice money, because then the schools could be smaller. But in fact, the school choice money makes up a large percentage of the operating budget. And so the debate happened on the town meeting floor, to your point, and it was incredibly transparent, and it comes up again and again and again. So this is the first time I've ever seen a school budget not discussed in the town meeting.
Can I make one other point on a point on the observation about the additional money from if Affordable Housing Trust has been funded entirely through CPC? We all need to remember that money that we fund Affordable Housing Trust from is from free cash, and it adheres essentially to the free cash policy to an extent. So if you directed that to a school program, it would become annual, that we'd have to find all of that
Fair
money.
enough. So
Just as
I was using that as an
Yeah,
example, and it
fair.
turns out it's a poor example, but I'm sure
No,
there
I
are
just,
plenty of examples of use of
there may
free
be a
cash.
problem, but I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
because if there was a year that there wasn't enough free cash, there may not be an allocation to Affordable Housing Trust, so that's.
Fair enough. I guess I'm just saying that if all of those CPC projects were on a prioritized list of free cash uses, and then we probably would pick different things.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you
Yeah.
bringing that up. So, on this whole process thing, and what works and what doesn't, is it appropriate for this committee to send, if they chose to send a letter to the school committee before the next budget cycle saying, based on these conversations over the last number of years, we believe there could be appropriate additional investment in education on the island, and, with a well-presented case, the return on that investment would be very likely to look favorably in recommending the town meeting to seriously consider it. Something, I mean, to sound like a lawyer with all those words, but, something that at least gives
Ask for more money.
yeah,
Yeah.
to the board and copy
Yeah.
Cozart and say,
I'd give them a target. I'd say ask for 5% more money and tell us how you spend it. Or something to make it concrete, right? Because if you say ask for more money, they'll say, well, I'd like 50,000 more for some blah, blah.
You're onto something, because if you're saying he's conservative, there is a feeling that they're not gonna step outside of the box too much.
So, I agree that we should take whatever action we can to encourage the school committee, school board to ask for more money. But is it appropriate that the finance committee take any action to do that? Isn't that a policy level discussion? Isn't that strategic planning? Isn't that board of selectmen should be saying this is the community we'd like to have?
It was not in Lennox. The finance committee
Well, but we're
totally
not in
was
Lennox.
involved. I know that. I'm just saying.
We have a board of selectmen who's undertaken a long process to have a strategic plan. They're going to have a series of community discussions about who and what the community wants to be. I'm fully with you in this instance that the school deserves more money and it could make good use of more money. But is it for us to pick and choose and say, you guys should ask for more money and, give them a wink and a nod, we'd support you if you ask for it?
Maybe the letter goes to the select board.
But still, now we're like flipping the policy thing. We're saying to the board of selectmen, we think you should spend more money over here. And maybe they're saying, no, we want to be the town with the shiniest sewers. Maybe that's the thing they decide we want to be.
Brian's bursting.
No, it's a very good discussion to have, but remember, we operate within this really wonderful thing called Proposition 2.5.
Right.
And it's great to say, tell somebody to ask for 5% more money as the example, but that's 5% more money that has to be found somewhere. And I just, as an aside, I want to remind everybody, the selectmen made the decision to create, or not the selectmen, I should say, the NRT advisory board made the decision to implement year-round funding, which in 2021, which is, in my world, is basically 3 weeks from now, we will be faced with finding $400,000 to fund additional money that we will be obligated to give to the state for this new year-round service. So
I have no illusions that we're not talking override.
okay,
In my
well,
mind, this is over.
all right, well then that's fine, because
Yeah.
that's a very different discussion,
No,
okay?
in my mind,
Okay.
I was thinking override from the outset, not that you're gonna take it from someone else.
Okay, because we do operate in this
No,
little
that's
box that prevents
that
us.
is a fair point, it's a zero-sum game, I get it. But in my mind, it's an override conversation.
Okay, and that's,
Well, Mr. Dicker said it's not
You can miss it,
Doctor, keep doing it.
did she vote no?
Notwithstanding,
That's voted
It was the
down.
only I vote.
Shortchanging him every chance I get.
I think the dilemma is to just assume that we can override our way out of it. I am keen on forcing choices. Okay, so if we want to fund transportation, if we want to fund schools, then this is, the beanstalk doesn't grow.
I'm a dickler on this one.
I think we have the money, but at the
Diet.
same time, I believe that the discussion should be joined about what is it that we don't want to do.
What would you be willing to stop doing in order to do
You
these
just coined a
things?
good phrase.
I'm a Dickler, is that
I get,
a good phrase?
I guess
I'm gonna be a dickler on this.
Very good, write that down.
I think we need buttons.
I get that as a sentiment, I guess, where I'm talking about sort of breaking a mold and doing something that needs to be talked about, whether it makes sense for you, whether it is setting policy. You kind of have to isolate this one and keep it simple if you hope to get this done. But I get your sentiment.
I don't know if I think it's setting policy, right? Because the test scores, all the reports are there, all the data is there, as you said, the test scores are not good. And so there's a financial connection to that.
Maybe there's a way in the
I don't
middle.
know. I don't know that there is. And I'm not shy of sticking my nose in places that it, might not be welcome. But we do have a school committee, we do have a superintendent, we do have, a policy setting board above us.
How about this? I'm sorry.
It's fine.
How about if the letter said, if the reason you're not doing this is your concern that you don't believe town meeting would support it, the finance committee just wants to let you know that with the right argument, we believe that we would be in a position to recommend town meeting consider this.
Yeah, but we could make the same arguments that we made in our comment on Dickler's article that said the town has considerable spending power. We have borrowing power, we have other ways of getting money. Just reminding you of that fact. Maybe that's enough. And again, in this instance, I'm, with, it sounds like a majority of the people here, that I wish the school would ask for more money, and I would support them if they did.
So, would you be willing to take on drafting something? And we would consider it in July?
Careful, you might get action in 2 or 3 years. We don't want to be hasty.
We should wait and know what the population's going to be.
The only reason I say that is that in order for us to discuss the letter, we'd have to have another meeting. Which I'm happy to do in June if, there's.
And so, and
You meant July this year?
Well, we get together in
No,
July
I'm
anyway.
kidding.
So I guess this all goes in, both these examples are going to a broad thing of maybe how this meeting could even work better in the future, or a portion of this meeting, that is there a way that we can feed back after town meeting our experience to influence the process, to be involved in some of
It wouldn't be, it wouldn't hurt to have what we're talking about right now, when they still give them out, the state gives out the mission statement for everybody. Us, the Board of Selectmen, we're supposed to all be on the same page, so I don't know why, it wouldn't hurt that once a year, just like this, we all sat at a big round table and discuss things just like this. It would
There-
cut through a lot of red
There
tape.
is no page to be on. I mean, that's, Jim Kelly's been talking about it since he left here, and I know he's working on it. I'm not, indicting him for it. He's been working on getting a strategic plan. It's a slow, long process.
Well, at least everybody would know their concerns. We're on the finance committee, the board of selectmen, who also said it going in the same direction versus they have a meeting over there and they have concerns and they're going that way, and we have concerns and we're going that way. At least we could,
Good suggestion. We don't have a summit with them. We don't sit down with them ever, really, and have an open conversation.
we keep saying we're gonna do it, at least since I've been here.
Just a couple other things I have here, and then we can come back. So I just want to, so, one comment I had written down to talk about, we had a meeting in January or so, and I don't know why it happened, where it felt a lot like this. It was a little less formal. We weren't pushing to get to motions, that I thought was an incredibly valuable meeting, and I can't remember exactly, I wish I had a better memory of why it happened, or what, maybe you do. I think it was early January, it was before you left, and it just felt like there was a little bit more chance for everyone to kind of say their view on things, and I thought it was incredibly. I came out of that meeting going, wow, I have a much better understanding of people's. I think we maybe talked about the Dickler article a little bit, and we talked about some of the others. So I thought that, in terms of what worked well in the process, I thought that worked really well. And then I have just one other thing I want to cover here, and maybe someone can answer for me quickly, which is when we vote to take no action versus we have a negative motion, why? And what's the difference?
It's softer.
What does that mean, though? Is that what it is? It's kind of a wishy-washy, it feels wishy-washy.
I'm with you, there were a couple of others, I remember over the last couple of years, where I would just
Say
say
no.
no.
Well, see, I have a different view. Why don't we just take no action on anything that we don't want to
But
have?
I think that happens to be the more common out, is that we don't want to, vote to approve. We
No.
take no action, which is like saying, well,
No, it isn't. The reason I
it's
said,
everybody at town meeting. I think we ought to say something, there were articles where I thought, actually, was Dickler, didn't we?
and we had a debate about this on
Yeah.
Dickler,
And
and
it's
I
like,
think
why didn't we just say no?
we're
thought
not
it was
clear
just
among
doing everything
ourselves
else.
what the difference is. If we're confused on what the difference is, we definitely are not giving meaningful signals to the voters about what the distinction is. The reason I say take no action is we have this custom of not having negative motions voted on the floor, and we vote, and we always turn, if it is called, the negative motion gets replaced by a submitted positive motion. So my notion is, if we just took no action on everything, if it doesn't get called, it doesn't become a law. If it does get called, you don't have the confusion of competing motions. Someone then has to make a positive motion. We can write all the most negative comments in the world as we want, but I'm wondering why we make negative motions at all, actually.
So I think that Cliff is right about why we've done it
Yeah.
historically, which is it's an easier letdown. So you don't have to make sorry, Chris, your article really sucks.
But so a couple times over the years, like when Richmond came up and we had to, look at, are we allowed to talk about zoning? Because we weren't welcome there. So a few times over the years, I've gone back and looked at, what is our charge? And our charge is basically to advise town meeting on anything and everything and in any way that we want to. So I don't know, when history started and when people started saying special town meeting only does this and annual town meeting only gets to do everything, or finance committee needs to stay in its box. Planning board until recently, beyond my memory, but I'm told very recently, didn't even sit up front at town meeting. Now they do. Things have changed over the years, but our charter, or our charge hasn't, at least to my knowledge, it hasn't changed. We can basically do what we want. We don't need to be nice, but I think, you two both make good points. Sometimes there's a good reason for taking no action. Sometimes there's a good reason to say, hard no, we're not interested, please don't bring it back. It's basically.
I'm not getting the
Here's
distinction.
Here's the example that was this year.
Yeah.
Article 67, moving from Board of Selectmen to Select Board. And we said take no action because we didn't have any sense of the financial implications of what they were asking for, which was to do it at the state legislature level, and then. So I had met with Melissa and Jen and said, you're wanting to do this because it's the right thing to do, but you're waffling. You need to say it's going to be this much effort, Just have some numbers to explain to people that this isn't a big deal to get done, people. It's not going to cost us $100,000, blah, blah, blah. So,
Which is
so we
something-
voted, take no action as a committee. I got mobbed at a completely different event. Denise, why it acted, blah, 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 blah. And I called David and said,
Would you please meet with them, is what you said.
I said, what? I
You
said,
said, would you please meet with them?
yeah, I said, well, you know, talk to David. So, but my point was because I couldn't articulate in the moment why we said take no action, though I remembered us having the discussion,
Mhm.
and it was a sensible answer, because we didn't understand, and I had gone back to them separately, because I happened to bump into them and say, by the way, this will help your case. And I remember Stephen Cohen saying to me, because finance committee said take no action, it's gonna get overthrown, you guys are stopped in front of progress, and I looked at him like, okay, that's your opinion, Mr. Cohen, let's move on. So.
This is exactly my point, though, is that you create all this subjectivity. This
Exactly.
difference between take no action and not having negative motion. We all may have a different idea in our mind, what it makes, and we're being less helpful than we could be
But
to town meeting.
But
in
that's actually-
hindsight, the take no action for me felt prudent for the finance committee to say with the absence of data, which these people were not
Right.
presenting.
Followed by a comment saying, we would have done something different, but we don't have enough
And
information.
Right.
we
So
did,
start.
Right.
we made no comment on that, which was probably an error in hindsight.
So,
Wait a minute, the attorney, DeGiorgio, said it was gonna be a big deal. He said it was gonna cost money and it would be this big
We
deal.
did. We also took that vote in the context of somebody remembering to us that there was a discussion at the Board of Selectmen that said it's gonna be costly, and that was the reason they didn't vote for it.
right.
Or some members.
Yeah, I
did.
think
And to do it as a
Yes.
reference was a simple way to do it and
Right.
achieve
Right.
a similar
We were
outcome.
agreeing in spirit.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
anyway, that's.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that people think there is value to the distinction without it creating,
If it has a
a lack
comment
of
with it
clarity.
or a way of
So in that
framing
case,
it.
it was, because we had three options. We could approve, which we had reservations because we didn't know what it was gonna cost. We could say no, which would, we could say no because of the cost. That may or may not have been interpreted correctly. And here, I thought the middle ground was the appropriate one, and that's what when I met with them, that's what I explained.
Right.
And,
I couldn't remember the moment being mocked.
but at the same time, we have other articles that we do just with this, that, rather than, being very specific, we evolved over time. Take no action is a softer way of saying no. And, well, I think and I put a note that this is something to talk with Sarah about, because I do believe you're correct, it would eliminate some of the confusion. The question is there's been such a buildup over time that historically,
Mhm.
everybody ipso facto has figured out what the gradations are.
right, so to me, there's some risk in that, right?
Yeah.
That there's an ipso facto understanding of gradations, but it sounds like,
Well, and actually, maybe you are making a good point. There really will just be two options. Either we vote to approve,
Oh, we don't.
or we don't take any action. And it's effect, in effect, no.
and we can back that up with a strongly worded comment, like, we think this would be, cataclysmic if it passed. But maybe, I don't know.
Well, this is worthy of having a discussion with Sarah to see what the implications are.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
maybe
to me,
there's
it's the
some.
difference between a veto and a pocket veto, right? Like, there's something meaningful about saying no, rather than saying, we're just not gonna look at it.
We're not gonna comment.
Yeah.
In the take no action, sometimes the
But
article
you can
comes in
comment
a
if you
table.
take no action, but to say, we're not gonna take it, I mean, does take no action even require a vote? I know that we vote on it, but does it even? I mean,
Right,
if we went back and looked, like, is take no action that we didn't even vote on it?
Well, but so
I don't know.
take no
take no action.
the article doesn't get
No,
called.
I get it.
And then when the group vote happens, is that article approved or is that article not approved?
It doesn't, it's not approved.
I mean,
No action's taken.
what does Robert's rules
Because-
say about taking no action? Does it say you take a vote and one of the options is you take no action, but you voted on it? I mean, that's.
So you guys are talking
action.
about two different things right now. You're talking about our votes here and whether we have a motion,
No.
and you're talking about the
Yeah.
I'm
vote.
just trying to make sure I understand your point. So are there circumstances where you really do want to have a,
The effective
vote
town meeting
not
is
to
exact.
adopt.
The effective
So the
town meeting,
negative
take no
recommendation.
action, and a negative, and a motion not to adopt is the same exact thing,
Right.
right? So it's really just about communication and messaging, and what's clear and what's not.
Okay?
Oh,
Okay.
it's something that's been bothering me since the
Oh,
whole thing.
that's-
It was confusing to me, so I thought. I'd
Okay,
put it out there.
no, I think these are all,
That's what I got.
I have to admit,
okay.
I was really disappointed about the traffic, presentation and how that went. Yeah, really
People
disappointed.
redesign Old South Road and the
No,
flying.
yes, and
Yeah.
I thought that, I thought that, I actually felt like we didn't do a great job with that. I think whether or not I mean, first of all, I certainly didn't anticipate that that was gonna be a hot button. I thought people would want to have the road expanded. But I don't think that we as a group were prepared to take on giving any comments about that or why we thought it was a good idea. And I also thought that the town was ill-prepared with the graphics and the way of the explanation, and people really got stuck on whether there was gonna be a Jersey barrier. And it was the first time I had even heard of anybody talking about a Jersey barrier. And that was a really big thing to have happen,
Well,
and to have it go away.
if you remember, we got graphics
6 weeks.
6 weeks before town meeting, but like 10 days before we had to vote.
Right.
I mean, we knew the number
Yeah.
for months, but we didn't see what it was gonna look like. And I don't think the town meeting was presented with those illustrations at all.
Then we shouldn't have let it go onto the, I mean, I don't know what we could have done, but it seemed like that whole thing, when it got up and got talked about, just completely fell apart. And I think that, yeah, this group, we're aware that, we're aware that we need that to happen, and we had trust in the process of that. But the people who were showing up at that meeting, I think they were just blindsided, and then on top of that, they didn't understand what it was gonna look like.
Yeah,
So that's a capital program from the town. So, I mean, there we can.
Yeah, we have a transportation officer and a planning department and, you know, everybody whose job it is to present those things and say this is in your best interest. I don't think it's our job to present that.
So it runs through you guys.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. We actually suggested very early on in the process, I made a point to reiterate on a regular basis that our feeling was that if something was going to be recommended by Capital, and then it was going to go on to be recommended by Board of Selectmen and the FinCom, and obviously this was, you know, backing up a step. Structural infrastructure, roadways was an important development that the Board of Selectmen wanted to see. So I guess the point is, you know, we were suggesting some type of a strategy session pre-town meeting, pre-information about town meeting. And the strategy is not to be promoting something or selling something in the sense that we're selling something. The idea was to be strategizing in the sense that we're trying to get out important information so people can make informed decisions. Couldn't get it to budge. I don't know where it fell apart, but it was a big disappointment when the vote came in. And especially because some of the things that I heard talked about were Jersey barriers, or this is really going to be stop signs, or I'm sorry, stoplights, and different things, when in fact the very essence of the improvements were to prevent those types of things. So I felt it was a lost opportunity personally as the chair, and I think certainly the majority of our group did too.
Isn't it somebody's job? You said you don't think somebody should have sold it. I think somebody should have sold it. I think that is the town's job to sell the idea, because we're always making a choice. You know, it's either this idea or the alternative. You know, sell us on the reason to spend the money.
It's true, and I think the same thing happened with our island home, right? I mean, it
But
was a huge.
There was an organized campaign to get the word out, to go visit people. And, you know, that was a months-long campaign that fell short, but it was there.
Right.
You
No,
know?
I mean, look, I think Libby and Tim, all these folks work super hard, but I think after every town meeting I've been to, there's always an article or two, some of them big ones, Nantucket sewers, you could say the same thing, where, you know, it would have benefited from a more carefully thought out marketing, whatever you want to call it, marketing, sales,
Right.
communications program to people, see the pluses, and, you know, presumably you want to focus on the pluses of why the town wants to do this.
But nobody got up, including this group and myself, and said, if we don't vote this through, you're gonna sit in traffic for 2 hours on Old South Road.
But that is distinctly not the finance committee's job. I
And
mean, if we were called,
I-
and in some towns, they do call our committee the advisory committee, then maybe that's our job. But we're the finance committee currently, That's not our job. We have many other people who sat next to us in front of, and in, facing us, whose job it is. I think Mike Burns, he'd probably tell us he didn't convey the message as well as he could have.
And I'm guessing they were surprised at the pushback and the redesigning of Old South Road on the fly. I mean, some of the, some of the people who stood up and the comments that were going on, I don't think anybody anticipated that this could possibly go in this direction at town meeting. Not to make excuses, but I was surprised.
Kind of
in
the
there.
blowback on Richmond is what happened.
Yeah, yeah,
And a bad winter and a site that looks just awful,
yeah,
just reminded people that
yeah.
And the
It's
saving
another part
grace
of the
is that they
process
just
that
haven't built anything yet. I guess that's the
I mean,
saving
to me, that
grace.
was the message of the blowback
Yeah.
problem there. And the nail in the coffin was when, what's his name, somebody asked where the money was for Richmond, and Neil Patterson said, is it in the bank? And,
Or in the mail, is the check in the mail?
Yeah.
So just on the capital side of things, Stephen, I don't disagree with you if the town gets behind something that the town fathers and the select board and the town admin, I think, can get behind and sell something. We, like you, are advisory in that we make a recommendation. So
Yeah,
our role
I don't
would-
think it's your job.
Yeah, our role is simply to try and facilitate getting information out there. And I'm not suggesting it's any one particular group that didn't do something. I think everybody has their hands full when it comes to these projects and town meeting. So it was unfortunate, but we had hoped that there would be some strategy to maybe get more information out there, even if it was just a discussion campaign amongst various members. So I just wanted to be clear that why we didn't get behind the idea of selling something is,
Sure.
it wouldn't be our role.
Yeah, I don't think it's your role, so that I didn't mean to imply that.
Okay,
That's it.
great, good. Any-
So there's a public hearing, I think, next Thursday, on at least parts of it. If anyone's interested, we'll try to go.
Okay, yeah.
I think we should meet more often. I know we're getting into the season where nobody wants to do, nobody has time to do much, but I think we should. I think we should meet more often, especially now. Because
To what agenda?
this agenda, I think we've just opened up a whole bunch of discussions, and we didn't come to many resolutions, or we haven't set action items. And this was a great discussion. I think you enjoyed hopefully this one, but you enjoyed a similar discussion in January. And I think if we're going to have a different process, then we need to continue to have these meetings, and then we need to ask the Board of Selectmen for things. We need to say, can you empower us to do this? Or we need to make recommendations to town administration that we'd like that. But if we just have this discussion and we tuck the notes away, we'll just have a similar discussion next year.
Well, I'd certainly be willing to recommend, suggest to the selectmen that we get together jointly in June, and review our stuff, and ask them also to put together their own thought process from how this all works. I mean, we're making this process better every year, so, and we're, as you all know, we're a far cry from where we were. We couldn't have had this conversation a few years ago, just somewhere. So, yeah. Should we continue to do the stuff with NCTV? Was that radios and stuff like that? Did that work for everybody? I think the town wants to start that earlier in the process.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Any other?
What was the question?
About continuing,
Do little
we did
video stuff.
little
Oh, yeah,
videos.
yeah, yeah,
Should somebody take Jason Bridges' job? Is there somebody who's the public
Forensic.
outreach?
Yes,
Forensic,
I just met her
Rulo, you met her out at the.
at the ribbon cutting for the bus and for the,
She was there when
She
she
was
was there
out at-
when we made the video.
Videos,
oh,
She was there.
yeah, she's great, she's
there.
great, she's really on the ball.
not Florencia, the
Yes.
other woman. I'm thinking of the other woman though, who's now the head of director of tourism and,
That's
Oh, Janet Schulte,
Janet
That's
that's a
it.
different person.
okay,
different
she,
job.
that wasn't Jason's job.
No.
Oh, Florencia took over Jason's old
Yeah,
job.
basically.
Okay, oh, I know Florencia.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's good. I think that we should, be doing more of the videos like you all did this year. And, you know, that's how people want their news. That's how
Sure.
people want messaging, is in short Instagram and Facebook videos. So hopefully that's a strategy.
I agree, it's also a proactive way to counter some of the negativity on Facebook. I mean, some of those pages about Nantucket, those threads of conversations are intense.
Now you're talking about taking away people's fun, and
I don't want to take it away, I just want to put out a
Nantucket
positive
Consignments
message.
is negative,
Okay?
that's the only one I look at. There's other ones?
Okay, so let's, if we can, because we're gonna get out of here, probably no later than 6, but, we want to talk about, the upcoming capital process. Do you have the draft schedule?
You have it in your packet.
Okay, so, there's a draft schedule. I know you're meeting next week with Libby,
Yes.
so, so this would get, this would basically get a presentation in early November, working through your schedule. And Steve and I assume you guys have you looked at the schedule?
No, we haven't reviewed. I have set to meet with Libby and Brian, as you mentioned, this week. So may I just kind of run through? Okay, so, you know, not to bury the lead, we're looking to do more in less time. I'm not a big proponent of artificial deadlines, so if we have time towards the end of the process, I think it's important we use it so that we have a well-formed product based on information that's, you know, thoroughly vetted and a good recommendation that stands up to questions on the floor of town meeting if it comes to it. Along the lines of scheduling, I just want to say up front, I mean, we had 2 pages, a page full of outstanding items in December, mid-December. We had a page of outstanding items in early January. So it's a little ambitious to be thinking that we'll be wrapping this up at the end of November. I think in the context of the whole overall, we're looking at a change of last season was 3.5 months, and this schedule proposed is 4 months. It doesn't address out years, which is something we didn't do last year, which I feel is mandatory, and I think the committee, let me say this, I don't think it sufficiently addresses time for out years. The amount of time we have per department hasn't really changed much. We've added a half a month to the process. So that's one of the things I'll be reviewing with Libby and Brian, and how we would work that into our program. As you guys know, the capital improvement plan has become much more robust and comprehensive. We have the financial policies and procedures that were part of a financial compact that our Board of Selectmen adopted, and our town administrator signed along with the Lieutenant Governor to follow. So we're trying to live up to that charge. And there's a lot more lifting to do in there that we haven't even gotten to yet. I'm not suggesting that necessarily translates into having a later delivery date, but it does require that we have, I think, amongst intra-board and within our own process, we have a tighter development cycle determined, and then we continue to work on it that way. I think that some of the things that we did not address out years. We are looking last year. We are looking at a fuller, if you will, list of potential projects from department heads than has been presented in the past. We're looking for them to really be thinking through anything that qualifies as capital, to put it in the plan, even if it's a placeholder. And then obviously that dictates that we have some time to discuss it and evaluate it after Libby and Finance have had a chance to do that. So there's a little bit more time involved there. I'm confident that we can make, if we have a date that our mandate under the bylaws is to provide a report to you all and the Board of Selectmen 30 days before town meeting. I'm not suggesting that, and I'm not suggesting we use that as a fallback. But I am saying that I think we need to work as closely as we can in terms of scheduling so that it works for what it is you all need to accomplish, the Board of Selectmen need to accomplish, obviously, and that includes some of the stuff you all have been talking about today, which is the information out to voters in town meeting. So we're cognizant of those things. I just wanted to make you cognizant of some of the things that we're discussing. We began discussing these at our last meeting on April 12th. And we discussed and resolved that we would pick them up to try and hammer it out at this meeting. And as I said, I will be meeting with Libby, and there are out years are a concern in building the out year evaluation, assessment, and recommendation into the process into this year, and a couple other things. One of the things that we haven't done, I think, as well, and we need to do more of, is to be reviewing the prior year status. And we'll be asking, we've discussed and we made recommendations in our FY19 report for an actual report of any outstanding projects, what the status are, if there's any exceptions, any maintenance required, any kind of a change up that may be on the horizon. And then at a later date, perhaps 6 months out, we would do just a brief exception, a partial meeting on exceptions and maintenance update. So that's one area that we need to be working on. There's various other areas, but I thought I would come.
On the timing,
Yeah.
For what it's worth, for me, it's really valuable to get your recommendations a couple of weeks before we do the meetings with the department heads. That's kind of like what feels right to me, which in the last couple of years, I think it's been sort of the last week of January.
Well, last year, every other year before last year, we've had the stuff in December, and we've had a meeting. Like the 6th, on capital,
Okay.
it's like the first week of December, it's right, I think it's one of our first meetings after.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, there's plenty of time there. I'm just saying, when I start to focus on the capital piece personally is a couple of weeks before we meet with the department heads to put it all in the context of what they're looking for on the operating side and what they're looking for on the capital side.
And we're, just to follow up to that, is I think it was expressed in our last meeting by all the membership that we're committed to meeting earlier and more often in order to develop this program that we've undertaken, the charge to meet our charge. And that if it were, I think basically what we're looking at is meeting much more often than we have scheduled here in our draft as a capital committee, so that we can meet I would say a before Christmas break. I'm not totally comfortable at this point saying that we would be able to get anything to you guys the first week of December. I think there's a lot to be done, and we still haven't even had a chance to review this with Libby, let alone our own group. But I think we've gotten through some heavy lifting with the DPW, transportation facilities, and that will be a big chunk of time that maybe a meeting or two. I'm not positive yet. I think where we are, I'm speaking on behalf of my group without having, worked through this with them, and knowing that I'm the person who puts this report together, is that I think at this point, to be frank, the earliest would be mid-December. I don't think November is at all realistic. And if there's things we have to pare out of our charge, then I think we would want to have a discussion with the Board of Selectmen and Town Administrator about that, because we're trying to live up to the compact that was signed with the state, which is, I understand, what we're supposed to be doing. And I don't think that there are any pushback on that. I think it's just going to be a matter of coordinating the resources. The Finance Department, it takes them a lot more work to be doing the more thorough scope that we've undertaken. And in our recommendations, we're not, certainly my position is don't bring me a problem without a solution. And so in our recommendations, we've made very concrete recommendations on how the town might go about. And we're not suggesting that it's the way to do it, but it is, I hope the martini that gets the discussion going with respect to how our capital assets manage for the longer term more comprehensively than we as a volunteer board, working with the finance department on a part-year basis and a town administrator on a part-year basis are able to deliver. The capital assets rise to the level of perhaps a director, and in addition to that, bringing the capital projects management in-house, saving the town considerable amount of money by doing it in-house with project managers that we currently sub out. Some of that is by law, it's a requirement, I think, with the schools. But saving money in that regard so that it can help to to fund and underpin some type of a, well, it was called the Capital Assets Needs Director of Operations. You know, Nat is always telling me it's gonna take forever to get anything done, and I'm telling him we can do it. And that was what it was, the acronym is can do.
Right.
So anyways, that's the big picture and the little picture, because I think it's important that you have the information when you're talking about the kind of the minutia of scheduling.
Well, from my perspective, and other members of the committee can speak, I'd like you to adhere to the schedule that's here, the 28th.
Of what?
Of November.
And may I ask what the inelasticity is about?
My inelasticity
Yeah.
is about, so that we have time to review this information. I mean, this past year, it didn't come until January, and we discovered that we didn't have enough time to go through this. And then the second piece of it is, I would highly recommend that you focus, there are a couple of areas to focus on. We know where the big capital issues are. We need to have an out-year plan for sewers, because we're going to a rate study on sewers. And how we set our rates is very much determined on what we've got for capital projects that are coming up. So I think that's a really important ingredient. I'd say the same thing for the water company. They're going through a rate study as well, and their cost of service study is based upon what it is that they're planning on, making the investments in. So, and obviously the DPW, we've agreed to fund some preliminary design work there. So I would assume that they would propose, and maybe you've already had this conversation, their investment staged over several years, which again would be, it's a big number for us. And I think, one of the things that you guys could really help the town on is to not necessarily get all of this done in terms of out-year forecasting, but look at the places where we know we're gonna end up having to spend some money, so we have a good idea going into it. And given the two rate studies that are being done, it's just a propitious time to get those things done.
Capital Committee, as Stephen said, may not have focused on out years, but there is an out year. The CIP plan for sewer is 10 years out right now, with all the maintenance and all the work that needs to be done, including the potential sewering of all the areas in the needs from the last CWMP. And those have all been given to Hazen and Slur, who's conducting the rate study for sewer. Some of it has been taken out because we believe it would be obviously funded by the taxpayer, being the sewer extension. All the other pieces have been included and calculated in the potential, in the rate study impact model that they're doing. The same with water. Water has a plan which is in the 10-year CIP that is done. So they are in there, and those should be included in the rate forecast.
Yeah.
Terrific, but how many of those are gonna come before town meeting? And or said another way, is there a way to batch all of them, have one vote on the 10-year plan, so that we're not back at town meeting every year, voting on whether we want to, lay another pipe going from A to B?
How many will come before town meeting? Over the 10 years, my guess, with the exception, let's take the sewer extensions out, okay? Because those are slightly different.
That's a different, but
The majority of that 10-year plan remaining in sewer, I would envision will come forward through the next 10 years. It may not come forward in the years that it's projected now, because as you're aware, things change and it's a dynamic, it shifts as priorities or things happen that bring areas needing to be focused on forward, and things have to be moved to accommodate it. But I would say, I mean, the focus is on the infrastructure improvement in the sewers, so it would be my expectation that it will continue to come
I
forward.
guess the question I'm asking is, how do we do this so we avoid having votes every single year on individual sewer projects or water projects or whatever, that a vote is taken that this is what our capital, it's been vetted, this is what the capital, by the consultants, by Stevens Group or whatever, this is what our capital program is. And yes, there will be some variation, there's probably some timing slippages or maybe some accelerations, but that we get on a plan and actually do it and not, 3 years from now change our mind because, somebody came up with what they think is a better idea. Am I off base on?
No, I mean,
based on
I
that?
understand where you're coming from, but if you look at the sewer capital plan as let's take Old South Road as the example, okay, I guess for this. I mean, in order to do what you're suggesting would require me to basically ask town meeting today to approve a multi-year borrowing plan.
Absolutely.
Which, if we could convince them, great. I wouldn't necessarily say no to that, Mr. Chairman, but you'd be talking about, don't quote me on this number, but you'd be talking about in excess, asking town meeting to approve for the sewer in excess of probably 70 or 80 million dollars to approve today for me to do over 10 years. That's what I mean. The only way to accomplish what you're saying is basically to do that. And
Right.
if you guys are on board, I'll be happy to put that together to do. I have no, that's,
But if you're gonna set rates based on that, aren't you
We're-
de facto?
we're
They
setting the
already-
rates based on the expectation of when that's being done, so I mean,
Right.
sure. I mean,
If not,
in a
why
manner of
don't you-
speaking, we're assuming that town meeting will approve everything in that plan. All you're saying is that you want me to ask town meeting to approve the borrowing today so
Right,
that we
what
can
if
just
town
go
meeting
ahead and do
says,
it.
no, we won't approve it, we're not gonna set rates lower, assuming that we're never gonna do that work, right?
Don't approve
I
the
mean, in the
spending for the
absence
sewer.
of approval of
Well,
that plan.
it does lead to a
Well,
question is
like
if
the
town
rates.
meeting rejected the $80 million, let's just use the 80 million,
Yeah, come
then
back
I've got nothing for that year,
Yeah,
which would, in my estimation, would set us farther behind than doing it the way we're doing it. But it's a point for discussion as we move through the process.
If I may, it's also financing strategies and is one of our charges, and it's something we have not gotten into, which we will be getting into, which will involve discussions such as this and a recommendation. Historically, the capital committee has deferred to finance and town administration. I'm not suggesting we will do anything else, but we need to be making more informed decisions, and we need to be, in terms of a recommendation, and then weighing in on it if we're going to be completing our charge. We are, by the way, aware of the sewer and water rate reevaluations. That was included in our report as a comment. And, I don't know. I got an email not 2 weeks ago saying that FinCom is looking for a report by Christmas break, and now I'm being told that it's the end of November. So when I
Well,
say
I'm just
when I
looking- I'm
say
looking
when
at
I
the
say
schedule.
inelasticity, excuse me, that's what I'm referring to. Is it seems like you all, I respect, you have work to do, and we want to do whatever we can to help accomplish that. But if we're being asked to do more with less, or we don't have the resources to accomplish it, we can only do so much. And I think it's realistic to expect that before Christmas break, historically it's been, I think, December 15th or the week of the 15th that you all get a report. And we would like to work towards that in a collaborative way. And if there's anything that we can be doing to get you information earlier that you might need, for instance, we're looking at doing out years. We suggested doing a joint meeting in September with you all and the Board of Selectmen, which I believe made it to our scheduled draft that Libby provided. That was a suggestion from our group. And what we were hoping to do is be hitting out years earlier on so that we could be discussing that both from the policy perspective, but general information. And if there are other ideas along those lines where we could be helping one another both to be diligent and to meet a timeline. I'm not here to say no, I'm just trying to be realistic. I've never been a yes person, I'm never gonna be a yes person. If that's what they want for the chair, then they picked the wrong guy. I'm just trying to be realistic, but at the same time, I'm trying to be flexible and develop. If there's something else we can be doing that helps you all, then we're all for it. So, I mean, please don't misunderstand the message. I'm not here to be adversarial or confrontational.
Well, I think that the message that I would like to impart is one that we don't want this to slip into January.
Understood.
To adhere to, traditionally, the stuff has come in December. It then allows us the opportunity to meet. I think this year we were scheduled to have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen, which we ended up having to cancel because material wasn't available, and then we never had the meeting.
Well, we actually kept our schedule. I want to be clear about that. I have our schedule.
Well, you may have kept your schedule, but the schedule, and I don't want to get into a.
Well, our schedule
argument
was-
here, But the schedule that we worked under, which I'm looking at here, showed that capital program committee recommendations were to be reviewed on the 18th of December, and that specifically was going to be of 2017, and it was specifically going to also include the Board of Selectmen.
Well, the schedule, and maybe this is a point that we need to be resolving, so I'm not trying to wear in on it, but I think we do need to focus on it, is the schedule that we put together with Libby October 20th of 2017, shortly after we met, which was distributed to the FinCom and to the Board of Selectmen, stipulated a Thursday, January 18th meeting to present recommendations at the joint Capcom FinCom Board of Selectmen meeting. So if there's a miscommunication, I apologize, but we did keep our schedule, and we will endeavor to do the same this year. And I can tell you, for one, that I'm not really interested in writing a report over the Christmas and holiday break. So, you know,
Okay, before that?
we'll definitely work on it, David.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments?
There's a lot of stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're gonna meet again in July? after-
Well, I think June. Stephen was suggesting,
Yeah, I mean, why, if we run out of things to talk about, we can cancel meetings. But, you know, it's the 10th of May, and now we're gonna talk about giving away the rest of May, all of June, and then maybe sometime in July. I think that's a disservice to
So-
people we're serving.
I was gonna take what I've got from things here. Stephen, you,
He did.
Who sets their schedule? What is the
Your side.
hierarchy there? I mean, they're a subcommittee of what? Of us or of the Board of Selectmen?
well, that's always been a subject of discussion, but if you look at, I
Does
think we were
anybody have an
saying.
org chart? Every time
You
you
know-
ask who
you know
falls
what?
under who.
You know what?
I'll take the
Read-
lead.
You know?
Read, let them, because I just read it, because I was looking for the dates when we had to have our up papers. And in the, if you go to the town's website, and it talks about the role of the finance committee, it very clearly says the capital program committee is a subset of the finance committee.
And the finance committee can act as the capital program committee
if they
there's
don't
not,
act.
if there's not a capital program committee.
So
That's what I think.
I take away that they're a creature of the finance
Is,
committee.
unfortunately, I don't have this schedule. For some reason, I can't get in. It's public Wi-Fi.
They won't let
It's
you in.
public, they won't let me in, it's password protected. So I'm not looking at it, but from what I've been able to catch out of my side eye here,
Oh, I'm sorry.
is this, I mean, is this so much more onerous than previous years that we can't, that it's impossible to do? I mean, Steve made it sound like it's absolutely.
I don't know,
No, last year we had much more work because we were ramping up with a new process. And I think we still have some of that work, but not nearly what was last year, right? I mean, in terms of
Well,
all
it's
the
the
rankings.
second year of the process, so one would hope that the relative ranking of importance, schedule, and everything will be a little bit smoother to work through.
But now they're going to advise you on debt
Finance.
strategies, right?
Well,
I'm sure Brian will have an answer to that.
It's for Windows.
Okay.
the charge, the charge does say that they, you know, because we have to present to them if we're gonna if we wanna finance it. I mean, they probably have some questions that haven't been asked before, but I mean, by the time we get to them, we've already fleshed out how to do it and what it should look like. I mean,
What I found interesting was that we have a joint meeting, a proposed joint meeting at the end of September, and yet the end of November was an impossible deadline 2 months later. I thought, well, you should have 80% of it by your joint meeting in September. You
Well,
might-
I will say this, I
You'll
mean.
get direction at least at that meeting, so.
There is a lot, they do a lot of work.
In
and it's-
between those two meetings?
In between that and getting to November for a report, okay? I mean, Julia and I worked with Stephen when they wrote that report. It was a very, very large undertaking, and they spent a lot of time with each department, the larger departments,
Yeah.
okay? Asking questions and understanding it. So I'm not gonna say whether they can or cannot
Yeah.
accomplish anything, because, you know, that's up to
Sure.
the chair of that committee, whether we can get it done or not. But the process last year was much more in-depth and a much more thorough process as we evolved to it than it has been in the past. Okay, not to say that the work in the past wasn't good,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
certainly been an evolution. And last year was the first year where what we really had, and also to kind of to your point quickly, David, too, with sewer is you really had a scenario where sewer, DPW, and transportation basically hit the reset button and started from scratch.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a lot to go through from that. And if you actually saw what the DPW originally came forward with, which last year was about $34 million worth of capital on their own, that they had to go through. I mean, it was pared down by the time they got there from the town admin, but it was a much more robust process, I have to say. So, and it was a lot of learning curve, which there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of refining the process and making it even better, in my opinion. It's an evolution.
Did Stephen suggest, or did he mention that his group had made a recommendation to get an extra staff person to help them? Is that what he was
Not to
talking
help
about?
on this, but I think he was going down the, if you hire project
Or he
managers
wants an
to get-
operations person? I mean,
To accomplish projects.
if it is a challenge, let's say, you know, it's not impossible, but it's a challenge to meet this deadline because of all the work that goes on in between meetings, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, can't we get somebody, even a part-time person, to help shoulder the burden?
Perhaps, I think there's.
I mean, there's a
reasonable
project
staff.
manager in town admin, okay? Which, I mean, the Deputy
Chuck
Chuck
Larson.
Larson is the project manager for the town, spearheading a lot of the projects. But I think that, you know,
But
some
I'm
of,
talking about more on the planning side. I mean, is that what, is Chuck the can-do person? Is that what he was talking about?
I don't know if he's necessarily the can-do person. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what his frame of reference is, because the reality is that all the capital program stuff goes to us. Okay, we review it with the town administrator, with Libby, the town manager, and the departments. It gets culled through there, it gets formatted. She determines what we think we can do based on free cash and, you know, staying within various other financial policies, and then it's brought to them, and then all the work from the departments flows through us into them, and we work. So there wasn't a lot of fall down from my perspective with my staff in the delivery of the information to them.
So an extra person wouldn't help. I'm just trying
Look,
to
I would love
figure
to
out-
have another person, but I don't know that the person is gonna solve some of what we're,
Again,
you know.
We sat through a joint meeting last fall where Stephen went through some of the analytics and ranking analytics that he's sort of developed, which,
With the person in Hong Kong?
whatever. I mean, I just think there seems to be a few extra layers of icing on this that, you know, are, in my view, unnecessary. I mean, I was on the capital program committee 4 years ago. I personally have always found that the 10-year ad plan to be more important than getting into the weeds on every single pickup truck that we're going to buy. So, but I say that with a very superficial understanding of what the committee does.
Well,
If Peter were here, I know that Peter feels like they did a lot of good work, so.
Well, my impression was they did a lot of work about how to prioritize things, you know, assuming that there was always going to be loggerheads about which thing was more important than the other. But at the end of the day, it was people's opinions about what was important that was fed into that algorithm that spit out what was more important. So, you know, why don't you just sit in a room and figure out what's more important and skip all that?
And that goes precisely to my comment about getting the sewer projects and the water company. And I mean, to me, yeah, you can argue about the timing on some, and I'm not talking about service extensions and the bigger things, but you know, we've got a repair and maintenance and replace issue with sewers. We know that. We know it's going to cost us a lot of money to fix. let's understand what they are, and then instead of putting them to this, oh, I don't think we ought to do this project, and Joe says, yeah, I think this is the time to do it. You know, let the professionals and the consultants come up with a reasonable schedule, so that we could, you know, the sewer commissioners could, which are the board of selectmen, could take a vote on it. It clearly gets put into our pricing for our rates, so we don't have the problem that the water company has, which is they've got a rate structure up here, and they've got an expenditure over here,
They got a lot of money in the bank.
which they don't want to spend. Anyway, I mean, that, to me, you know, to me, this is part of this evolution that we're talking about, which is, you know, better alignment on things with CPC and town mission. It fits in with what the strategic plan looks like. It's getting the town.
Plus, the voters need to understand the sewer expense. Otherwise, the same thing that's gonna happen with the nursing home and the road is gonna happen with the sewer.
That's, maybe it's wishful thinking. I mean, there's absolutely the brain power on this committee to help the town and the selectmen with you guys to drive the town to think a little bit more proactively on these things.
Okay, so we're gonna meet in June.
I mean, Jim,
So, follow-ups, I will put a memo together on what we talked about, and I will circulate it, just for open meeting reasons, please don't.
don't answer it.
You can answer it, but just answer it to
Just
me.
answer it, don't reply all.
Not that I don't want other people to see it, but just so you don't
Get it.
get in trouble. The second is, are you gonna take the action on the letter to, that we can talk about in June? Would you be willing to do
I
that?
have all the meetings copied to
I would be
them,
willing to do that, I think,
and they can follow along.
yes, I think we'll do that. I think what's gonna be an interesting following conversation, I think the notion of how it gets done and how it gets positioned relative to the rest of the budget probably would be something good to talk about in June.
Yeah. Okay. But if you would just.
Yeah, I'll start.
I mean, so we have a straw.
Yeah.
And to work on. Is there
Like
anything,
Joe's letter for when he was doing the dicta.
anything else? Cliff, you're always the voice of
No,
reason and reason.
it's almost like it's plenty of questions. I mean, I'd like to see David Gray come forward and tell us all about the sewer.
Yeah, when is the CMOM finished?
I don't know when it's, I don't even know how far along we are. You want David Gray to come talk to us?
Well, I talked to him on the road the other day, but I mean, he has a lot of information, and I just started.
If you want to hear from him.
Sure.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it fits into your idea of having more meetings and us getting more information.
Right.
I will be happy to get him here. He will love to come and talk to us. He
Sure
lives
you
the
will.
stuff,
Let's
he
do that.
breathes the
Let's
stuff.
meet every
Let's go to the
3
sewer
weeks,
plant.
2 if you guys will abide me, but let's meet every 3 weeks and have somebody come in and do a presentation for us or answer some questions, and then we can, you know,
I
think
think
big
that's
picture at the
a really
same time.
good idea.
Well, what it will help us, if we do something like that, and that is to really understand, not that we don't understand when we come budget stuff, but really to get.
Yeah, let's get the context, so, you know, when we're talking to department heads or other people also, it's not always in the context of next fiscal year's budget.
Good.
Okay, anything else?
Nope.
Motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Thank you.